We can have an economy, I'll just finish my sentence, am I talking too long? We can have an economy of 40 million, but that requires home building standards that apply across the country. I have more to say, but I think I'm being told I've talked too much, so let me stop.
Minister, with all respect, we have a lot of questions, and of course there's a lot of senators that want to ask questions, so they would appreciate succinct and direct answers. Thank you so much.
Gang, what's up? Aaron right here, Canadian Looney. We've got Chrystia Freeland, who must have found Melanie Joly's stash. Minister of Transport can't stop running her mouth in the Canadian Senate, which they say is partisan. It's not partisan. Here's some proof. Conservative senators right there. So if there's conservative senators, they're the opposition. That's not partisan. Simple as that. Let's take a peek. Let's get into this. She can't stop running her mouth, man. Chrystia Freeland is a special kind of politician.
Oh, yeah. We will now proceed to the first block of questions. I remind my colleagues that you have 10 minutes for each block, starting with Senator Ousakos, CPC.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Minister, to the Senate. The stated purpose of the Free Trade and Labour Mobility in Canada Act is to remove federal barriers to the interprovincial movement of goods, services, and labour within Canada. To do this, you are choosing to recognize provincial standards as meeting federal requirements. So my question is the following. What was the original purpose for establishing federal requirements which were different from those established by the provinces and territories? And are we just going to find ourselves in a race to the bottom in safety, environmental, or consumer protection standards?
It's a very good question, Senator, and I think that one of the reasons that this work has taken such a long time is none of the barriers to trade, I think, are imposed maliciously. No one puts them in place because they wanted to create problems for Canada and Canadians. Having said that, I think that we now have this thicket of overlapping rules and regulations, and now is the time to act. So let me give you a specific example. Today, there exists a federal requirement to register, to be a federally registered land surveyor. Without that, you cannot work on federal projects. I believe that, for instance, the province of Ontario is pretty good at qualifying a person as a land surveyor or not, and I think we will cut a lot of red tape and get projects done more quickly if we say, you know what, we'll take that Ontario qualification as good enough without making you jump through federal hoops.
Minister, would you say there are instances where the federal government should be asking provinces to accept our federal standards rather than deferring to provincial ones?
Certainly. There are areas where the federal government has the authority to regulate and where provinces do not. Particularly that pertains to areas like national security. In the area, for example, of tobacco, which is, I think a really legitimate area of concern, federal regulations that apply to tobacco apply to the manufacturing, sale, and promotion. There are no provincial regulations on these aspects of tobacco, and so that's why this legislation would have no impact on it. But I want to give you an example of where there is federal legislation, federal requirements that will be lifted by this legislation that I think is a really good thing. And that example is energy efficiency of appliances. So right now, the federal government has its standard, and provinces have their standard. And so if I want to buy a washing machine, which I did during COVID because I guess we were using the machine so much, that machine has to pass Ontario and federal standards. What this legislation will say is if you meet the provincial standard, that's enough. And why that is a particularly just smart and effective action to take is that these machines are principally manufactured outside Canada. And so the energy efficiency of those machines is determined when they come into our country. And so this the system that we currently have in place, and I believe this is overwhelmingly the case when it comes to interprovincial barriers to trade, is about red tape. It's about a thicket of regulations, which were all put in place by well-intentioned people, but have the cumulative effect of weakening our economy. In fact, an IMF study found that the collective impact of our internal barriers to trade amounts to a 7% tariff that Canadians impose on themselves. Think about that. When foreign countries impose a 7% tariff on our exports, we are up in arms, as we should be. But today, that's what we're doing to each other.
One last question before I cede the balance of my time to Senator Batters is, do you have, Minister, any projections regarding how much this Free Trade and Labour Mobility in Canada Act will reduce the amount by, a specific figure?
What I can offer you are the projections of economists, and this has been intensively studied, of what removing all barriers to trade and labor mobility, the impact that would have on Canada. The view is that this would be worth up to $200 billion. That this could increase Canada's GDP between 2 and 4%. As I said, that currently we impose a tariff on ourselves of 7%. Now, I want to be careful and candid, as I always seek to be when talking with all of you. That impact will not come immediately, and it will not come solely because of this legislation. In fact, interprovincial barriers to trade and to labor mobility are not principally imposed by the federal government. They are principally imposed by provinces. And that's why, in my opening comments, it was important for me to give credit where credit is due to provinces who are racing ahead. But it's my belief that the federal government needs to do its part. Provinces, frankly, have been magnificent on this, and this legislation is about all of us responsible for Canada saying, provinces and territories, well done. We are matching what you're doing. We're doing our part, and it's about building the momentum to get this done.
Senator Batters.
Minister Freeland. Minister Freeland, Bill C-5 allows your federal Liberal government to circumvent federal laws if your government decides a project is, quote, in the national interest. Several years ago, your government forced through the egregious Bill C-69. In doing so, you ignored the strong warnings of not only our Conservative opposition, but also all provincial governments, I believe. Then, the Supreme Court of Canada declared the vast majority of Bill C-69 to be unconstitutional, again, as many of us had warned. But what did your government do? You took your sweet time to propose a legislative fix, and when you did that, the new Bill C-69, actually with the same bill number, was contained in your Budget Implementation Act. It was rammed through Parliament without proper debate or study, as the Senate decried. And we didn't have a chance to try to amend what many still claim is an unconstitutional bill. So, Minister, rather than allowing Bill C-5 to give your government the ability to circumvent highly problematic federal laws for, quote, national interest projects, why don't you just repeal Bill C-69 for once and for all?
Thank you for the question, Senator. As I said, I believe all of us in this House and in the House that I have the privilege of being a member of, we disagree about many things, and that's entirely understandable. That's called democracy. I think this legislation is one piece of legislation every single member of this House can agree on. I just voted in the House of Commons together with Conservative MPs on closure on this legislation. That says to me that my Conservative colleagues across the aisle in the House where I sit recognize that this is a critical moment in Canada. It's a moment we have to set aside partisan divisions and say, let's build in Canada. I'm proud to be a part of that. I hope senators will be as well.
Minister, My second question is, who speaks for Saskatchewan at the federal cabinet table? Saskatchewan is the only province without a full cabinet minister. We have one lone secretary of state who, as stated on the PMO website, does not sit at the cabinet table. So when your federal Liberal cabinet, and does it, is determining whether a project vital to Saskatchewan will fall within the, quote, national interest, according to Bill C-5, who at that table will speak for Saskatchewan?
So I am really proud that Buckley Bélanger was elected as a Liberal MP in Saskatchewan. I actually was really glad to spend some time with him and his community before the election. I spoke to him just this morning about this legislation, which he strongly supports, and he is a Minister of State and has a very important voice in our deliberations, including often participating in cabinet discussions. I would also say that Premier Moe, who I personally respect very, very much, I found him to be an excellent partner when Canada came together to fight COVID, is a strong supporter of this effort. He was an exceptional host when he hosted us all in Saskatoon, and Premier Moe is one of the premiers who believes very strongly, as do I, that now is the time to come together and to build Canada. I really hope that all senators from Saskatchewan and from across the country will take the same view.
Thank you, Minister.
So, gang, what do you think about our partisan Senate? It's not partisan at all. No matter how many times they try to jam that story down our throat, that's a false narrative. Aaron, Canadian Looney, like, share, subscribe. I wonder where Melanie Jolie's stash is. Chrystia obviously found it. She couldn't stop talking or succinctly answer questions. We'll catch you in the next video. Thank you for watching this one. Let me know in the comments if you like Senate videos. There's lots out there. Nobody seems to cover it. It's pretty quiet most of the time, but it's interesting when Chrystia Freeland gets into the Kool-Aid stash and can't stop talking. Catch you in the next video, guys. Thanks for watching.
The one we call Canadian. Canadians.